From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., Cole on Congress. The program discussing national issues that affect Oklahoma. Your host, U.S. Representative Tom Cole.
Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Cole on Congress. Today I'm pleased to welcome my friend, my actually very good friend, Congressman Don Young, to the program. Don just began his 21st term serving as Alaska's only representative to the House of Representatives. Congressman Young serves on the Committee on Natural Resources, where he chairs the Subcommittee on Alaska Native and Indian Affairs. He also serves on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, which he formerly chaired. And Don, it's great to have you here.
Well, thank you for letting me join you, Tom. You know this is always a good program.
What do you mean letting me? Come on. You've been around. You own this place. There's only one guy on our side of the aisle.
I wish you told that to the press today. They said, did I lose any influence over the years? And I said, some. But I still have a lot.
I was telling my communications director on the way down here, I said, yeah, Don Young roams these halls like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Everybody's afraid of him, and and with good cause sometimes. You have a reputation as being a legislator's legislator, but being a really strong advocate for your state and the issues you believe in.
I thank them for believing that too, because that's part of our job. If you believe in what you're doing, you got to leg up on everybody instead of just walking through the process.
Well, I know first time I visited your office, I saw that gigantic bear skin, strung up on the wall as you walk in. I thought that was kind of a statement as to how you would be treated if you didn't behave in an appropriate fashion.
I have 33 heads in my office over the years, and I've served in Congress, which is 40 years as of Friday. And now, as of Saturday, I'm the longest serving elected Alaskan official in the United States, or have ever been in the United States Congress or the Senate.
Remarkable record. Now, if I was quick-witted, I would ask, now how many of those heads are congressmen and how many of those are animals?
If I was allowed to put that many different heads up there, there'd be a lot of them up there. But I just believe very strongly in your district. And there's only one of us. That's the beauty of my job. Be able to speak for the state, and sometimes you have to do some things a little different, and I've been somewhat successful, and it's because of friends like you and other people that believe in what I'm doing for the state and for this nation, and we've done well.
Well, let me talk about one of the things you did really early in your career that's probably impacted this country as much as any other piece of legislation, and that's the creation of the Alaskan pipeline.
The Trans-Alaskan Pipeline. Unique thing about this, I got sworn into office on March 14th, 1973. On March 15th, we had our first hearing on the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline. And at that time, Sam Stagger was the ranking member on our side of the aisle, and he came to me and said, what bill are you going to introduce? And of course, Senator Stevens and Senator Gravel had introduced the bill to widen the right-of-way. Mm-hmm. And I said, I guess I'll introduce the Senate bill. And he says, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to introduce one that I think will work. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, it's not only widens the right-of-way, but you cannot file a lawsuit once the bill passes against the development and the building of the pipeline. And luckily, John Melcher I was a minority then. He agreed with Sam, and we introduced that bill, and we passed it out of committee with 2 votes. Got on the floor of the House, and you could actually hear people screaming, "You mean there can't be no lawsuits?" That's the way people stop things nowadays. And it passed by 16 votes in the House, and of course the Senate had to pass it on the Senate side. And we went to conference and retained that provision. Consequently, we were able to build that pipeline in 3 years. Now, was all of that because of me? No. We were in embargo at that time. Gas was only 39 cents a gallon then, 1973. That's hard to believe today, 39 cents a gallon. But we couldn't get gas. It was the embargo from Saudi Arabia and the OPEC countries. And so our ability to build that pipeline, and we did it in 3 years, and ship it to refineries in California and Washington State, gave us the ability to replace 2.5 million barrels of oil, which really helped the United States. And I wish we were doing more of that right now. But it was a great story about getting things done.
Well, you've been a leader in energy all the way through, and obviously Alaska and Oklahoma are both major oil and natural gas producing states. We tend to have a lot of interest in common in those areas. We're in a lot of talk these days about energy independence, the possibility that that may actually happen again. What's your view, and what are some of the things we ought to be doing, including, if you will, address the opening of the Arctic National Wildlife Preserve? It's an area that...
One of the biggest hoaxes we have to the American people is the environmental community saying that the Arctic Wildlife Range is so pristine and unique. It's been invaded before by man, as we have facilities there already. And we do believe there's about 39 billion barrels of oil 74 miles away from the existing Trans-Alaskan pipeline. And to me, not to tap that for the lower 48 when we have the infrastructure in place, it just boggles my mind. But they'll tell you all these horror stories, how it's going to destroy the calving area. We heard the same thing in Prudhoe Bay, same arguments. And how it's going to stop and do this and do that. And I'm arguing, why would we want to send money overseas when we have that much oil with the facilities already in place? A pipeline that can pump 2 million barrels a day, a terminus point and Valdez that can handle 2 million barrels a day, 2 refineries on the West Coast that can refine that oil. Why we don't do that is beyond my imagination, other than the fact there isn't the political courage. In the House, as you know, and you voted with me, we passed it 12 times, and it went over to the Senate and it got passed one time and went to the President Clinton's desk and he vetoed it. And now we can't get it out of the Senate, and that's where the real bottleneck occurs. Now the people are being punished right today because we haven't become independent. I know the President says we're producing more oil now than we ever did. Yes, but it's off private land, and the gas is off private land. And you can't really have anything to do about the price because it's whatever the market will bear. And our prices are based upon Texas, West Texas oil, and Brent oil. And it's a world market. Now, could we drop the price of gasoline? Maybe. Maybe not that much. We could. But more than that, we could have a stability. Because what hurts the economy of this country is if you write a budget and you have so much money for gasoline in a car based on, say, even $4 gas, which is, to me, should never happen. And then all of a sudden the price of oil is spiked because of the supplier of oil decides to raise the price. There's no way for you to recover and readjust your budget. And that's what's happening in the United States. So I would like to see us really aggressively pursue what fossil fuels, and we have more than everybody imagined. And on top of that, go ahead for the other forms of energy. But when they tell me I can't build a dam because it might interfere with somebody canoeing, or we can't have gas because you can't frack, which by most of your gases come from fracking.
Absolutely.
Now, is to me is ludicrous in the sense that they don't understand the importance of fossil fuels themselves. This president doesn't want to use fossil fuels because he's worried about climate change. Well, that's well and good, but show me how you could move a pound of weight any cheaper. The fossil fuel does that. It allows you to move with your trucks, your trains, your automobiles, your ships, and your planes, product that makes our economy very strong. And when we don't have that, you can't do it with windmills, that's for sure.
Well, I always tell people I wish everybody could go to the Arab Emirates and see places like Abu Dhabi, and because when you look out on them, you need to recognize that's your money. Yeah. That's all, money from Europe and the United States and Japan, and we've created enormous wealth in other countries, and we ought to be creating it here first.
Right here. And the idea that we're not doing, like you mentioned, every nickel we send abroad is a job away from Americans. And I know where the president's coming from, but he's dead wrong. Do we need other types of fuel? Yes. You have your wind power and your sun power and your geothermal power, and yes, your nuclear power and your hydropower. Have them all so that we have the ability to be energy independent and energy efficient, and that would be the greatest stimulus to our economy.
Well, you've not just been involved in the energy end of this business around here. You've been involved in the transportation end intimately, having chaired the Transportation Committee, still very senior and important member, obviously, on that committee. We hear a lot of discussion about long-term infrastructure needs and transportation needs. You know, Chairman, you got more experience than anybody. What are the things we ought to be doing to make sure that we have the transportation network we're going to require?
It comes down to raising the money, and that's the hardest part. People, for some reason, think there's a magic wand. And this was my challenge when I was chairman of transportation. I wanted to increase the gas tax. By the way, gas at that time was $1.79, 5 cents a gallon, and then index it. We would have a trust fund that would be solvent. And a trust fund, for ladies and gentlemen, is every time you go to the gas pump, you pump that gas, 18.2% of that goes into the trust fund for building highways and bridges, etc. And so far, we've been able to use the trust fund to work on our infrastructure. But because our automobiles have got more fuel efficient, we're getting more use of the highways, but less taxes in the fund. And so I looked at this very hard and was able to, the only thing I could do, because President Bush at that time, and Tom DeLay and everybody said, no, you can't talk about raising taxes. I says, this is not raising taxes for foolishness. This is for the infrastructure which provides the economy of this country. I didn't win. I did get a $289 billion bill, which was originally a $216 billion bill, which I think was a good step forward. But we need about $560 billion just to break even now on repairs. See, we neglected the repairs. And so now people say, well, we can toll the roads. Okay, that's fine. I don't think it will work as well as a tax, or I like the value-added tax, what I call a penny a mile. And this is where I get in trouble. Some people, they say, well, what do you mean? I said, no. If you drive so many miles, every mile you drive, you pay 1 penny for every mile you drive. And that goes into the not the general fund, the trust fund. And if my figures are right, if we were to do that, we'd have about all the money I'd ever need for highways. It's based upon your mileage. It's not based, like, I'm a little old lady and I drive 100 miles a month and you drive 1,000 miles a month, you pay whatever that 1,000 mile, penny a mile, $100. They pay $110. But that's fair. And the gas tax is fair too, but the word tax drives people crazy, but you have to pay for it. And it can't come out of the general fund. That's for sure. But if we could do anything to take and improve that lot, in the sense of having monies available to infrastructure repair and expand, because we got more people.
What do you think, and I haven't formed an opinion on this, but and it's a state issue, but Governor McDonnell in Virginia, recently passed legislation to abolish the gasoline tax, shift in a revenue-neutral fashion 0.8% sales tax on all transaction, arguing that transportation benefits all our goods, everything come that way, and then that will grow going forward in the years. Whereas we know the gas tax between vehicles that use alternative fuels, between increasing efficiency, is going to be constrained. So, got any thoughts about that?
He's somewhat on the right track. Because one of the things that drives me crazy, by the way, is these Priuses and all these so-called cars getting a break in a HOV lane and having a tax break. When you think about it, their wheels are wearing my road out, and they're not putting the money in as they should. But he's on something that's correct, because you have to look at a solid model of how you increase the funding for this issue of infrastructure. The reason the tax failed is we didn't index it, and then the buying power. That's the indexing of it. The buying power went down. So the 18.2% and you pay in a gallon of gas, it only is about 9 cents worth of purchasing power now, too. That's why indexing is good. The other one, like I say, is actual miles. I mean, I believe that's the fairest, is actual miles that you drive. And we as Congress would set that mileage. Some people say, well, how would you collect it? Well, there's numerous ways to do that. One, if you get your automobile inspected, you have to have that done every 6 months. They know how many miles that you drove the car because you had it just treated, and it's based upon that, and that bill is submitted to you and you pay it. The other way, which a lot of people don't like, is I call it it's the OnStar system. which a lot of people say, what do you mean? Well, the OnStar system, the operators of OnStar know exactly where you are and what you're doing, and if you don't pay the bill, they shut the car off. I don't think people would like that, but it would work.
I don't think I'd run for office on that.
No,
that
but pay the
platform.
bill. See, we're looking for a solution, Tom. We're looking for a solution to the challenge of funding the infrastructure. We don't have the money in the general fund. If people want good roads and good bridges, safe bridges, they want to don't have congestion. One of my fights when I was chairman was we spend more energy sitting still than we do moving. Everybody says, how's that be? When you're stuck in a traffic jam, and around here in D.C. is a classic example, every one of our large cities the individual car owner burns more gas sitting still than he does moving from A to B.
That's a great point.
And I'm saying, let's diffuse that congestion. Now, some people like that because they're big things. They want to have light rail. They want to have people getting on trains like they do in India, if you ever seen when they're stacked like cordwood on top of the train. That's fun going through a tunnel, by the way. And I argue the American people, as long as they can afford it, are going to always have the car. Always have the car.
I once read mass transit is what Americans think other people should be using.
Well, that's true.
to clear out, and that is true.
Now,
I mean, we
there's
all
one
prefer
thing we
the
could
freedom.
change, though, and this, I'm getting a little bit out of line here, but one thing we could change is the idea of everybody. I tell you, I live in Great Falls, Virginia, which is 20 miles away from Washington, D.C. If I come to work in the morning at 8 o'clock, it takes me 9:30 to get here. If I come to work at 10:30, I get here at 11 o'clock. If I go home, the same thing. But I've never seen, as I'm driving in, if I was from 8:30, I see just as many cars going the other way. Why can't people sort of live where they work or work where they live? I mean, we're talking long range here. Why can that change around a little bit so you don't have that problem? Secondly is, what do people mostly do in offices? They're behind a computer. You can do that in the outhouse. You don't need to travel that far and spend that much money into an office when you're sitting behind a computer. Now, do you miss other things? Yes. So this is all going to happen in time because, very frankly, our inability to be independent. We do have that ability, we just haven't done it.
Let me talk to you about a whole other area where you're clearly one of the acknowledged experts and leaders in Congress, and you have been throughout your career, and that's where indigenous peoples are concerned. Alaska Native, Native American, Native Hawaiian. You've been at the forefront of trying to protect and expand tribal sovereignty and help tribal communities, many of which are mired in poverty and very desperate circumstances. What got you interested in this first and foremost, and has sustained your interest? And then second, what are some of the things that we ought to be doing from the federal level where tribal governments are concerned?
Well, my interest really is selfishness because I married an Alaska Native lady. I call her my gold nugget. And I have 14 Native grandchildren, all halves, which is remarkable. That gives me a great deal of interest, and that's self-serving. But in doing so, I was able to, with my mentor, which was my wife, to sort of find out what I think was happening with the prejudice that, again, existed extremely when I first went to Alaska. It's somewhat decreased. It's still there, both sides. But the big thing I found out, especially my interest in this, is the ones that have been abused the most. We've done well in Alaska, is actually the lower 48 and the reservations, and the inability for individuals within that tribe or tribes to be able to improve their lot because the government doesn't want them to do so. The permitting process on a reservation to get something done drives me crazy. You can't even though the tribe would agree, you can't even build a house on tribal land without getting the okay from the BIA or the government. And in other cases we have where a tribe is unified and they want to develop energy or they want to build a dam for energy and they have a market for it. guess what? EPA, Corps of Engineers, Fish and Wildlife, BIA, will all give you a dozen reasons why you shouldn't do it. You just behave yourself, and we're going to give you a side of beef and a blanket. They don't want the Alaskan and the American, especially the American Indians, to improve their lot. And I've had some people say, well, what do you expect? And I'm saying this, Tom, because that drives me nuts. There is no shortage of brain power. There is a shortage of being able to do something because they're discouraged from doing it. And I've got this Indian Empowerment Act, and if I ever get it moving and try to get it done, it's going to give them a chance for they really have sovereignty. They really have the ability of self-determination. The closest to it I found is the Seneca tribe in New York, where they have actually told federal agencies, you stay out of our business. We'll meet every standard that's set, but we don't want to wait for permits. We don't want to be told we can't. And we don't want any excuses when you say, well, that's not the way we do it, because that's the tribe. And I believe in this very strongly. The idea there's 56 million acres owned by American Indians, and they're living in abject poverty, high alcohol, high drug, women violence, you name it, because there's no ability for them to get out of that trap. It goes back to the side of beef and a blanket. And that's the government. And I'm saying that's not right. And I'm working to try to get cooperation from the tribe to say, okay, this is where I think. What do you think? And I'm getting pretty good response.
Well, I'm sure you will, because I hear this all over Indian country, and you see it. I mean, the reality is this is not federal land. This is their land that we hold in trust. There's no question who owns it, and they own it in perpetuity. And the idea that I talked to my good friend Harold Hamm, Continental Resources in Oklahoma. He's the guy that probably did more to develop the Bakken Shale than anybody else. And really, you would like him because he's a guy that kind of started out in the oil fields when he was 20, and now he's a multi-billionaire, and it's all his brain, sweat, and ingenuity. But we were talking about this problem of drilling in the Dakotas because there is so much Indian land. And he said, Tom, the sad thing is you'll see companies come right up to the border of the reservation and be drilling, and they'd love to go across that border, and the tribes would love to have them do it. But on one side, I can get a permit in 3 weeks, and it costs a couple $100. And on the other side of this imaginary land, it takes 2 years and costs $6,000. And so we're discouraging these folks who desperately want the resource and would use the revenues from the resource to better themselves. And boy, you run into that again and again and again.
And remember, it's not the tribe; it's the so-called agencies that are supposed to help them. Now, I will say this. I attack the BIA a lot because I think they're a malfunctioning individual group of people, good people. But they remember where they are on the structure of things. You have the Secretary of Interior, you have the Secretary of Parks, Undersecretary of Parks, Undersecretary of BLM, Undersecretary of Minerals and Management, Undersecretary of Fish and Wildlife, and then you have the BIA. But the top boss is up here. The bottom of the rung is the BIA. And I've argued all along they shouldn't be with that group because there's such a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Then you have the EPA over here really telling everybody up here that they can't do it because of the Endangered Species Act and lead in the water and everything else. So I wanted to, and I tried to get President Bush to listen to me on this. I said, make a cabinet position for American natives. Put it up there right at the table. Because now, by the time it gets down here, they don't have any influence. They're not funded adequately, and they don't have any skin in the game because they're booed down by all these other people up here because there's more people that love the parks, they love the fishing game, mineral management, and then we have the American Indians.
Well, I will tell you, there is a new sheriff in town over at the BIA. You may not be aware. I don't know if you've met Kevin Washburn.
He's a good guy. I've already met him.
Yeah. Well, just so you know, he's a Chickasaw Indian, my tribe. He graduated from my high school, and when they were looking at him for Senate confirmation, I know Senator Inhofe, who's been a really strong proponent of industry development, his people called over. They were so excited because he had been endorsed by the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association. He said, this is the kind of guy we need. We know that he wants to develop native resources.
Well, see, I'm meeting with him, I believe it's tomorrow, and my message to him is don't let those other agencies grind you down. let me know where Tom Cole and Don Young can help you, even if we have to go legislative process.
Yeah.
That puts a stop to that nonsense. They just sort of go like this. Don't do that. And that's going to be his biggest challenge, because they will try to grind him down and ignore him, not fill out forms. I mean, all kinds of nonsense. They play those crazy games, you know.
Well, let me pull you over. We don't have too much time left, but the big fight we're having this year is obviously the budget. Now, what do we do to try and get us back on a fiscally sustainable path? How do you see that shaping up, and what do you expect the flashpoints to be?
Well, of course, the flashpoints is two different philosophies. One, of course, is the Democrats very much believe that we ought to tax more and spend more. My argument, the other side and my side, is we're going to cut everything, not have any taxes. But neither side will work unless we get to the reasons we don't have the tax base we had before. And this goes beyond anybody else's pay grade but mine. But I've always said you can't cut your way into solvency. You have to produce your way into solvency. And it goes back to energy. It goes back to minerals. It goes back to foods. It goes back to fiber. We're importing all that now by borrowing dollars to buy it. So how do you cut it, everything, and solve the problem? You're still borrowing dollars to do what we're living on. Mm-hmm. Taxes, we had a bite at that apple. Are they totally fair? I think the tax system, very frankly, stinks. I've always promoted a flat rate tax. And I think it's the most simplest, and 10% across the board, 15, I don't care what it is. So I make $1,000, I pay $100 worth of tax. I make $100,000, I pay $10,000 worth of tax. I make $200,000, I pay $20,000 in tax. Everybody knows what they have to pay, and no more loopholes in that arena. But that's going to be our problem. I do think, though, for the first time in 4 years, the Senate is passing a budget. If they do, but I mean, we haven't had a budget. We've been operating.
Pretty sorry budget.
It is. It's a sorry budget, but at least they're saying I got a budget.
I agree.
And then if we have a budget, maybe the thinking thoughts get down and we'll get something done. But if we don't do this, I'm one that believes in an expenditure of dollars. I have not objected to that, as you know. If we're growing our economy, not to funny money. And this stimulus package was this classic example. Never produced a dollar afterwards. And anyway, I could go on that subject.
Well, you got 1 minute, and I want to know how you keep your enthusiasm up after 40 years in this. It's amazing to me that, because you tackle big problems, you've got the energy. How do you do it?
The energy challenge is always fun, because I don't have quite as much as I did, but I still got more than most people. But the one thing, the enthusiasm, is I am totally dedicated to what I do, and if you're dedicated, you get enthused. And to the point sometimes I'm a little dangerous. And so it's kept me going, and I'll continue to do this my Alaskan Sea that way. I know God's going to take care of me, or the devil, I'm not sure, but take care of me someday. But as long as I believe I'm better than anybody else doing what I do for my state, I'm going to continue to run for it, because I like what I do.
Well, I think the Lord will take care of you, because I think there's a good woman up there arguing your case right now.
I hope so. In fact, she left early for one reason. She wanted to get a petition signed so she'd make sure I get up there.
I agree. Well, Don, can't say it's been a delight to have you. Make the 30 minutes go fast, and just thanks for all you do. Thanks for the kind of congressman you are, and the kind of representative, and the kind of friend you make serving, in the House a joy. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it very much.
Bet. Thank you.
Appreciate it.